the program director here at WOR, Bob Smith, who had come down with me, and who, by the way, was responsible for me making the flight in the first place. It was the program department's idea to do this, and so we were talking about it, and he left to the office to make a phone call back to the station to tell them, apparently, that we were taking off. And we had buttoned down the hatch. A big bubble has a hatch on both sides, and I had pulled my hatch shut, and the pilot had locked it, when suddenly out of the office came Smith, running. He waved a couple of times, and the rotor was already going. It had been running for, say, 10 or 15 minutes prior to this moment, but the rotor was chopping away there, and Smitty came out waving his arms, and we threw open the hatch, and he said, we're in trouble. And I said, what do you mean? He says, we're in trouble. There's been a big crash out at Idlewild. Forget the parade. And it seemed like in an instant I was in the air. I don't know. I don't remember him saying cover it. I can be perfectly honest. I don't remember him saying go out there. All I know is he said there's a big crash. And the next minute I'm up in the air. Well, the pilot was a Philadelphia pilot. He had never flown a helicopter over New York. He probably had on casual occasions, but he wasn't sure as to just exactly where we were. And suddenly we were 500 feet over the Hudson, and there was a strong cross wind blowing in from Jersey out towards Long Island. It was maybe 20 to 25 miles an hour. And the helicopter started to buck, and I looked out over towards Long Island. I saw a column of smoke. It was so clear that the air was so clear that you could see for miles, and all around the horizon, of course, it was a bright sunny day, was this golden haze, and the buildings were just sharply outlined. You know how New York can be on one of those very unusual days where everything seems to be kind of etched against the skyline. It's just a brilliant day. Well, I could see this long, thin column of smoke. Well, it could have been a factory, it could have been anything, but it was the only thing I could see, so I said, go for that. Well, we headed directly across Manhattan, and he poured on the coal, whatever coal there is in these little things, and we were probably, our airspeed was probably 80 or 85 miles an hour, something like that, with a tailwind. And it just seemed like maybe a second or two later, well, as soon as I got in the air, I pressed the button to talk back to WOR, and I immediately asked them on the ground, what kind of a plane is this? What is this? And the man here at the master control said, it's an American Airlines plane. He said, I don't know, we're not sure yet what flight or anything, but it's an American Airlines plane, and it's down in the South Bay area, near the runway. So we proceeded on. We just continued to move, and then suddenly he broke in and said, it's an American Airlines plane. It's flight number 1, and it's a flight bound. He said at first he thought it was Chicago. It's an Astro jet. Well, by that time, we're very close to the scene. And I couldn't hear a thing because our intercom system was not working at this point. I could not hear the radio program on the ground. And he said, well, I'll give you a cue from here. And we arrived over the scene, and it was a very strange scene because there was nothing there. Nothing in the sense that when you fly out over the bay and these little islands are down below you, it is extremely flat. There are no habitation or anything there. You can see on behind you, off to one side, a little bit out to the bay side. You can see the Floyd Bennett Airport. All the planes are quietly sitting there in the sun. Nothing happening there. And the jets were taking off from Idlewild Airport just in regular rotation. They were flying off. A jet took off, and another one was circling, coming in, and another one was taxiing along the runway there. And I looked down, and John Roach, the pilot, said, well, are you sure this isn't? I said, well, it must be. This is Idlewild. There it is. And we looked down, and just at that moment, below us, I saw a big Navy helicopter with a big orange tail scurry along the surface of the water and make a landing on the bay side of the crash. Now, from the air, the accident looked like this. I'll try to describe it to you as best I can. If you've ever seen the New Jersey salt marshes where where the dumps are across the river, where you see the long columns of smoke seemingly rising out of shallow water. Well, this is the way it looked at first, and then more flame and smoke started to build up, and within a few seconds, the whole surface of the water for, perhaps 200 or 300 yards seemed to be on fire. Well, I had my glasses out, and in the meantime, John had contacted the Idlewild control tower, and they told him to stay where he was. We were about 1.5 miles, actually, air miles from the scene. We were not hovering over it. We were hovering about 1.5 miles from it. Well, I'll tell you, 1.5 miles in the air is a very short distance. And we were probably at an altitude of 400 to 500 feet, hanging out over a small island, separated from the accident by a little piece of water and then another piece of land, and then the accident was all spread out between us and the Idlewild runway. Well, I noticed that another plane behind me was taking off from the Floyd Bennett Airport. It was another helicopter, and very shortly thereafter, 2 or 3 other helicopters, official helicopters. I was picking up the numbers. There was a police helicopter, one of the big orange or yellow ones, and finally there were 3 Navy helicopters that I counted at that time began to converge and move back, and 2 or 3 little surface ships were moving in rapidly towards it. One of them was flying an American flag. It was kind of a strange thing. Yes. By the way, this is WOR AM and FM New York. Well, I got the cue to go ahead and go on the air. And it was such an unreal scene, such a strange sight, that I didn't really know what to say. I described what I saw as best I could, but I later realized that there was a high state of emotionality that I didn't really know that I was feeling it at the time, although I do realize now I couldn't tell you 3 words I said. I don't know what I said, actually. But I do know that the whole thing seemed so almost surrealistic, because you see, at the same time, off over to our left, Manhattan was sitting out there. And it was very bright and shiny and clean, of the rescue craft that were obviously all moving in on the scene. So we gained about another 200 or 300 feet of altitude, and then at that altitude, I saw one of the most peculiar sights. I had the glasses, and I was looking out over towards Manhattan, and John said, "What is that?" And we could see over Manhattan a very peculiar kind of a cloud hanging. And it sounds like I'm inventing this, but I'm just going to have to tell you exactly what happened. I picked up the glasses and I focused on it, and I said, "It's paper or something flying in the air, or birds." And it was a cloud of confetti that had been caught in an updraft. Apparently somebody tossed a lot of confetti or paper out of the window long before the Glen Parade got to lower Manhattan, and had been caught in an updraft and was sweeping up maybe 1,000 feet up in the air towards the sun. And there it was. And down below us was the accident. And another thing that probably added to the unreality of the whole business was a great cloud of gulls that continued to circle between us and the burning wreckage. Now, I couldn't see anything much larger than what looked like perhaps maybe the size of a good-sized pillow, maybe, as far as actual pieces are concerned. I could see a large shape in the water. There was a sort of a silver shadow in the water. Now, it did not look as though it were solid, though. I can only say that it looked as though the water at a certain place had a different color, where you could see it. In most parts, it was burning and continued to bubble. Well, then the flames suddenly quieted down. There was nothing. And I reported that back to the studio. In fact, I think I said that on the air, that the flames appear to be out. And just as I said that, went off the air, there was another burst of activity, and it seemed like all the water was on fire again. Apparently what was burning was the kerosene from the fuel tanks. And the fuel tanks, of course, were underwater, and the only thing I can do is guess that the fuel was floating to the surface. As you know, kerosene floats, and as it got to the surface, it would begin to burn, and this was just another big wave of fire. Well, it was evident that there was nothing that could possibly have survived this. the very instant I saw this, I knew. You just knew. There was nothing there. In fact, it was so low and so down flat to the earth that it was almost, it would have been difficult, had you been there, to believe that there had even been an airplane there. It was that nothing really to see. Well, I was immediately conscious of one thing, that I was afraid that if I said something that might say there are possibly some people alive there, there would be all kinds of rumors spread. This is the one thing I remember thinking. And on the other hand, I didn't want to say that everyone was dead, because how did I know this? All I could say was, I can't see how anyone can be alive. I just remember saying that, and that's all I tried to say about that, because that's a very difficult thing to say. Remember, these are people who are people.